sense of what the Obama administration is doing right or wrong, and what do you think should be done?
Well, my sense is that the administration has been caught flat-footed by Putin's moves, and that their theory of how the Syria problem would be managed, and I think they intended just to manage it and hand it off to the next administration, contain the problem perhaps within Syria, but not have it get materially worse or materially better on their watch. I think even that assumption now has proven too optimistic, that they are forced to respond to pretty surprising and assertive moves by Putin that are not fitting the strategic forecasting that the administration made. And so we're seeing an administration scrambling to come up with a plan C or D at this point.
What's your sense of what they should do?
Well, I think they have to recognize that what Putin wants is not what they want. So the president said repeatedly that Putin's going to fail. Putin's not likely to succeed, and that is true if you assume that what Putin wants is what we want, which is a post-Syria Assad that is stable and holding together, where human rights are respected, where the refugee crisis is solved. But if you think about the goals from Russia's point of view or from Putin's point of view, they might consider it successful if they can keep Assad in power, if they can keep the U.S. Locked into a frozen stalemate in the similar way that the Ukraine is a frozen stalemate, if they can keep the Ukraine issue on the back burner because we are preoccupied there, if they can embarrass the United States, if they can restore the Russian relevance. All of these are sort of secondary goals that seem to be achievable by Putin. And if that's all he's trying to do, well, then he may actually succeed at that. And so the first thing the administration has to do is realize that what it wants is not necessarily what Russia wants.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think we actually partially agree, not the first or the last time, despite our card-carrying differences. I mean, I think that the problem with Syria is, you're right, I think the administration has really taken a minimalist and very tactical approach for a long, long time. What do we need to do almost to get through the next news cycle? And the issue in Syria, even before ISIS, was not only the horrible humanitarian situation inside, but that its potential to destabilize the region. The refugee crisis, as it was spilling out to Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, was there a year and a half, 2 years before what we're seeing in Europe. With Israel, there have been a number of incidents over the Golan Heights. None of them have escalated, but it's kind of like rolling the dice till one escalates. And so the proposals that were made, particularly by late 2012, after the election and when it was really clear that Syria was not going to be contained, were ones I think the administration should have pursued. They were a combination of more assertive regional diplomacy, including Russia. I'll come back to that in a second. And I do think you really needed to establish some sort of safe haven on the ground, with regional troops. For them, it's an existential issue. For us, it's a threat, and American air power. With Putin now, I share your sense that he doesn't share the objectives totally that we do, but I don't think he totally believes he can hang in there with Assad. I mean, I think to a certain extent, in Ukraine, his goal has been to destabilize, right? Prevent us and the Ukrainian government from stabilizing. Here it would have to be to stabilize. You put yourself right in the target of the Sunni extremists. There are thousands of Chechens and Central Asians that have gone over there. And so I think in some respects he may want to have a presence there and a regime that has a heavy Assadist element. But I actually think there may be some flex for a diplomatic process, if handled properly, to get rid of Assad and his inner circle.
Well, Bruce, that is optimistic in a region that has not made many optimists. The challenge I see is that our partners in the region all want something a little different than what we want, and that ranges from our treaty allies like Turkey, which wants only part of what we want, to other partners like Saudi Arabia, but all the way down to would-be partners like Putin or Iran. And the administration's strategy requires that all of them sort of be pulling in the same direction for the diplomatic solution you described to work, but they're not pulling in the same direction. In some ways they view what we want as if what we want, what we're trying to do, they view that as dead wrong. Turkey, for example. I mean, Bruce, how would you have the administration respond to Turkey's pressure on us to back off of supporting the Kurdish group, which is the group that
Yeah,
we're
I wouldn't
supporting?
give a bid on that. I think Turkey's main priority has been the Kurds for their own electoral purposes, the game that Erdogan is playing internally,
Right.
And they have really focused on Assad. I think there has been a little bit more coming together there because they've seen the threat from ISIS spreading into Turkey in a lot of ways, including possibly, we don't know yet, right, in this most recent bombing. And I don't think this is optimistic. I actually think it's a very calculated sense of what Putin really thinks he can achieve. I mean, the president is right in saying that, Putin, is going to get himself in trouble if he continues on in this path. That's not enough for U.S. policy, right? Just to sit back and wait till he creates a quagmire. I really think it's a very realist sense of what the interests are and where the common ground could be. And I think our main failure of diplomacy has been with the coalition. I think the kind of leadership, it's not leading from behind, it's not, telling everybody else what to do, but the main leadership is basically saying, here's what we're prepared to do, here's where we think the common ground is, and we need you, the Saudis and the Turks and the Jordanians and the Emiratis, we need to all define what our common second choice is here, even though we may have different first choices. And I think it's reached that point. It's a lot harder than it would have been a year or two ago. But you've got to have a mix of a coercive diplomacy strategy that some of us have written extensively on. It has to be some sort of mix of the two. I mean, is that more in the lane of what you're
Well,
thinking?
Bruce, no, I agree with that. But with the following supplemental point, which is you cannot do diplomacy effectively unless you have leverage. And what the biggest achievement of Putin in the last month or two he's created leverage.
Right.
Now, his diplomatic position, his negotiating position, bargaining position in Syria is much stronger today than it was 2 months ago.
Right.
And the U.S. bargaining position in Syria is much weaker than it was 2 months ago. And so part of what if you agree that a bargain and diplomatic bargain is going to be part of the long-term solution, to get there, you have to first create more leverage on the ground. Now, the administration was going to create that leverage through this training and arming up rebel groups, the program that was in Jordan. They've shut that down.
Pretty expensive proposition, huh?
Well, they've shut that down. They've acknowledged that it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
And so their new effort is to work with the one Kurdish group, the YPG, that was effective fighter. And so they're going to say, rather than trying to create effective fighting force, let's find an effective fighting force and then empower that. And that's plausible. But Turkey views YPG as a terrorist organization, and Turkey called in our ambassador and registered a formal protest over what we're doing. And the rest of the creating leverage in Syria won't work unless Turkey and the United States are working hand in glove.
I agree, but I also think that the Turkey situation really goes back to the election earlier in this year and the upcoming election. It's sort of our international relations colleagues' theory of diversionary war, right? Because Erdogan's government had been on a very different path with the Kurds, up until the election setback. And so where this all settles out remains to be seen. I think the whole Syrian Kurdish issue is manageable. And I think that ultimately, from what I've been told, including by some well-placed Russians, that Putin was not happy with Assad. I mean, there were a number of points in which the Russians tried to exert some leverage on Assad, and he wouldn't respond. And so I just don't see Putin thinking that Assad is his guy on the long term. It doesn't mean that he, wants to make nice, but I think the question of whether or not Assad survives is something in which there is some negotiating power. The Russians have a theory, which they would argue, given our experience in Iraq and elsewhere, that, disbanding a state is not a good thing. I think there's something to be said for that theory, not necessarily what they want in return. And where that possible common ground is, I think you have to have both an on-the-ground and a diplomatic process, because either one by itself is not going to work.
Where would you see possible common ground with Iran?
Boy, that's a great question, and maybe when we come back in a couple of weeks, we'll deal a lot with where things are with Iran because we just reached adoption day
Right,
on the deal,
right.
and there's a lot more things. There's a sense too there, I think, of Iran has its splits and its politics, and none of us, myself included, fully understand their politics. But I continue to think there could be some common ground there too. It's costing them a lot. It's empowering Hezbollah because they're depending upon Hezbollah a lot more, and in some ways it's shifting the leverage in that relationship. So there may be some things to work with there as well in this overall effort, with them. But what that raises, and it'll be my last comment, is this whole question, of whether or not we both are concerned about going too far, too fast in the relationship with Iran. But what are the risks of also doing too little, too slowly? As we think about windows of opportunity and missed opportunities and think of other historical examples. So
Well, this
you
is
get the close.
one thing I'm certain of is that this problem won't be solved before we meet again. So there's probably more to talk about the next time.
I agree. We'll be back.